Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on Indian sociological tradition, in today's lecture I am going to talk about the contribution of A.R. Desai to Indian sociology. A.R. Desai is a Marxist sociology, applies historical materialism to understand society in India. He is kind of critical of the whole idea that Marxism is not suitable for understanding Indian society. He says if we use it cautiously, it will help us understand social structure in India, because much of the transformation in India has been taken place because of the shifts and continuities in the economic structure. So let us try to understand the contribution that A.R. Desai has made in terms of understanding nationalism, village structure, the relation between state and society, and also his contribution to understanding of the agrarian and peasant society. So when we look into his whole idea that he was a great teacher, there is kind of a lot of people have admired his capacity to be a teacher and a researcher. At the same time, he was an activist who wanted to kind of bring about an end of some of the problems that the society in India was facing. And he was kind of very strong in his opinion that much of the problem that was in India was a result of the colonial rule. So he was not only a philosophy, he was not only writing text, he was at the same time taking part in activism, he was a part of the Human Rights Commission, so he was a practitioner as well. So he kind of is one of the rare scholars who could combine theory with practice. And reading Karl Marx at a very early age, being influenced by his ideas, he imbibed the idea or the famous saying that philosophy not only interprets the world but also changes it. So this was the maxim or the idea that Desai kind of takes it very seriously. He takes it to his heart and tries to make it as a life mission. He says that whatever knowledge you gain, whatever understanding, theoretical understanding you gain, can make sense only when you apply it to eradicate the social problem. So he was advocating an activist role of sociologists. He was saying the sociologists should not only restrict themselves to theorize society, but should apply their understanding to make sense of the problem that is being faced and also provide solution to that problem. His interest was not restricted to theorization. He was not interested in kind of giving such grand theories as has been given by the Western sociologists. He wanted to establish a two-way relation between theory and practice. That is, you learn from theory, you apply to the practical lifestyle or to the practical problems that individual has, and the participant observation, field work, many a time helps us to understand a problem which then goes on to build a theory. So both takes place in a dialectical manner. For him, comprehension of history or theory is not enough. It had to be made applicable to social situation and transferred into social action for bringing about changes in social relationship. And this is very important because much of the students would kind of argue that what is the advantage of learning about these theories when we cannot actually apply to it. And therefore, we kind of also negate the whole idea that much of the theorization in the beginning of 1930s, 40s were being done from a Western lens, and these were Western scholars who would have never visited India, would have just read about the text or were doing an Indological study. So therefore, he kind of said that if you have to kind of understand reality, make sense of it, and then kind of indulge in social action, that would be the true task of sociology. Here in today's lecture, we will look into specifically some of the broad area or core areas of his contribution. The first indeed is his doctoral research, that is the social background of Indian nationalism. The second, in continuation with the Indian nationalism, he talks about the transformations of Indian society. That is the economic, social transformation, political transformation that has been taking place in India. Then third is village structure. for peasant struggle, because we know in 50s, 60s, 70s, almost every part of the country had some kind of a peasant struggle, and this could be in the sense that there was the change in leadership, say from a feudal lord to a capitalist, but the appropriation or exploitation of the peasant did not kind of end. It rather increased, and because of the increase in appropriation and exploitation, most of the time it led into an struggle or a revolution. So he's trying to make sense of why these peasant struggles were taking place, and the most important is he's trying to understand the relationship between state and society. So we'll look into these 5 areas which he has contributed to make sense of sociology in India. Those coming to the first one, that is Indian nationalism. He is of opinion that was a product of the colonial rule, and prior to the colonial rule there was no idea of nationalism. Those whole feeling of doing something for your nation, rather the whole idea of nation was absent, because prior to the colonial rule, India was kind of not united in the sense of one territory. So it is all because of the reforms and policies that British rules brought in, that it kind of became a kind of idea uprising, consciousness increasing among the people, that nationalism as ideology became very significant. He was of opinion, again applying the Marxist ideology, that nationalism is the result of new material condition. So this is very important, and this is kind of almost a unique way of understanding Indian nationalism, where he is looking at nationalism which would kind of most of the time considered as the political phenomena, to have its base in the change in the economic condition, and the economic condition or the structures in India of the Indian society changed because of the economic reforms introduced by the British rule, and it was because of the activity of the Britishers that the rate of industrialization kind of increased, new land policies were being introduced, and the entire effort was to move towards modernization. Now this moving towards industrialization and modernization was kind of considered as a psychological gain, but then people wanted to reject the idea that they would have this gain through the colonial rulers. They wanted to kind of invest this gain in their own people, and it is from this that the idea of nationalism emerged. And the political subjection of Indian people by the Britishers generated ideas of nationalism. So when we have this economic changes being brought in, which is changing the social relation or the pattern of interaction between people, it is also the political kind of subordination of Indian people, where the Britishers were of opinion that the Indians were not capable of ruling themselves. So these whole idea of economic exploitation and political subjugation led to the emergence of nationalism. As we are familiar with the whole idea of the changes that was introduced by the British land reform policies, and also because in terms of converting India into a production factory outlet, kind of led to a disintegration, and kind of the cottage industry, agriculture, they all suffered, and therefore they led to a formation of new consciousness, where people wanted to kind of free themselves from this subjection. And when we look into the colonial rule, many a time we kind of understand the positive contribution that colonial rule did was in terms of introducing Western education. Now what A.R. Desai kind of makes reference to is that this Western educated group or class, that were kind of a class which was receiving English medium education, was the middle class, and it was this class that actually paved the way towards nationalism, because they were able to understand through the English education the revolution that was happening in other parts of the country. They were able to make sense that the Britishers were not only subjugating or were not only kind of dominating in India, but the colonial rule was in other parts of Asia and Africa as well. And this educated Indian middle class kind of becomes conscious of the idea of getting freedom from colonial rule, and the Indian bourgeois came in conflict with British imperialism and became the motive for the rise and development of Indian nationalism. So, according to A.R. Desai, it was the introduction of English medium education which changed the material conditions. So, those who were able to take benefit of Western education, they were able to move up the class mobility and the economic conditions improved, and this class which was able to make advantage of the economy were the class that were in leadership in terms of motivating others towards nationalism. So, economic change led to sharpening of class differences. Class-based inequalities and contradictions, according to Desai, determined the nature of social change. So, on one side, we have these people who were able to improve, take advantage of English education, get employment as civil servant, were able to benefit. But on the other side, there was this mass or the peasants who were being exploited by the capitalist class. So, there was a class inequality which became very apparent. Now, this class inequality kind of leads to change. The change was not only in the class system, the change was also in caste system. So, India being described in much of the literature as a caste-based society, A.R. Desai is giving us both a class-based understanding of nationalism as well as the whole idea that the economic changes was also leading to change in the caste system. So, the new social and material conditions like industries, economic growth, education brought about changes in tradition. And as we are now very familiar that much of the Orientalist discourse on India would give us an evolutionary pattern of understanding Indian society, that since industrialization and modernization, the caste system was disintegrating and was going way towards more class based. But this evolutionary understanding has been critiqued, and there are a lot of understanding and theories which will tell us that the caste and class kind of coexist even in the contemporary time. So, Desai was basically a Marxist. He paid more attention to class, though he is saying that there were changes in caste also, but his attention was to understand class inequality which was the result of the colonial rule, and therefore the dichotomy between the urban bourgeois and the rural petty bourgeois was the main root of conflict. But this conflict was actually also at the same time leading to the emergence of the idea of nationalism, because people wanted to understand that why this conflict has happened for the first time, and the answer would be that it is because of the British rule, and therefore both the urban class as well as the rural were kind of united in the idea of getting freedom from them. So, the ideology of Indian nationalism and showed how it represented the interest of dominant class. He argued that nation and class have a contradictory relationship. So, basically his idea of nationalism was to understand the society inequality which was increasing, the class consciousness which was a part of it, and from there he also tries to understand the transformation of Indian society. So, he is trying to apply a historical materialism where he will try to understand the transformation from a feudal economy to a capitalist economy. So, the pre-colonial India is a feudal society, and the the colonial Indian society, capitalism has taken strong strength, and it is kind of moving towards capitalist economy. The British took India towards a capitalist path of development. The political and economic policies at the level of trade, industry and finance introduced by the Britishers led to the disruption of the old economic system. So, India was kind of no longer a subsistence economy, it was no longer a whole kind of self-sufficient unit, but it was moving towards a mixed economy, and that is where it kind of leads to economic transformation. Old land relations and artisans got replaced because of the land reform policies. So, these new jamindars were introduced. Earlier we had the feudal lords, but British policies brought in this class of jamindars, and these jamindars were basically private owners of the land. So, jamindars as private owners of land would indicate a shift towards a capitalist mode of production. New class group like agricultural laborers, tenants, merchants also emerged with this shift in the economic system. So, earlier there was kind of much of the economy was understood from a caste perspective, applying the Jajmani system, that there was the client and there was the patron. But when we have this land reform policy and this introduction of jamindars, then you have several classes being emerging. There is a class of laborers, who would be working on the land of the jamindars. There would be tenants who would be kind of paying certain amount of money to the jamindar and taking that land on lease for agriculture, and there were number of classes that emerged because of the change in the economy. So, with the emergence of this class, what also happened at the same time is that there was polarization. Polarization in the sense that one polarization was in terms of the rural and the urban, the other was in terms of economic relation, that is those who had lands, the jamindars and agricultural tenant, and the other extreme were people who were without any kind of ownership. So, Marxist understanding of the two class, a class of capitalists as owners of property and the other as kind of having no ownership, could be understood with reference to A.R. Desai's work. In urban society, there were capitalist industrial working class, petty traders, professional class of doctors, lawyers, engineers. So, class became a very important category to understand society because of the transformations taking place. So, and something which is very important is that Karl Marx uses a Marxist perspective and classifies the society in India in terms of pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial, and in each phase he shows that there is a kind of relation of domination and subordination, and there is a kind of a class which is on the upper side, that is they are the dominant, and there is the other side which is the mass or the peasantry, the working class who are being exploited. So, in the first pre-colonial we have the feudal, in the colonial we have the capitalist, and post-colonial we see capitalist bourgeois kind of taking place. So, we are very familiar that pre-colonial was a feudal society in which feudal class, that is those who had ownership of land, kind of were dependent on the peasantry for agriculture, and it was also a kind of a relation of domination and subordination. Similarly, in the colonial phase, we see the exploitation of the masses, the whole idea of thesis, antithesis giving rise to synthesis, and this capitalist class were kind of again emerging. The number of capitalist class in the colonial phase kind of got restricted, and the population of the mass or those who were without kind of gets more. So, this change in the agrarian social structure was kind of affected by the polarization of class system. Post independence, we see that there is a kind of class interest and interest difference between, and each of these class kind of becomes very dependent on the capitalist mode of production. And even in the post colonial India, when we look into from the early period to the late 90s, we see that there is a shift from a kind of a welfare based state which kind of was supportive of capitalism to a neoliberal state which is kind of entirely a capitalist state. So that is again, we will see how he is critical of the whole idea of a welfare state. When coming to the village structure, for Desai, he was looking into the Indian village as a self-sufficient. This is before the Britishers comes in. He says they had every economic, political structure within it, and they were self-sufficient. There was the kind of larger population of the peasants, and there was a kind of a reciprocal relation between the landlords and the peasants, and there was a political council or the village council which kind of took care of all the de facto matters of the villages, and the village council represented the community. Whatever decision was taken by the village council was accepted by the villagers, and therefore they kind of were self-sufficient, and kind of there was less amount of conflict and more in terms of settlements through the village community. There was no according to A.R. Desai, the pre-colonial village structure, there was not much of exchange relation with the outside world. They were kind of most of the, because there was a limited use of communication and other means, so they was kind of sustained in themselves. Now, what were the changes that Britishers introduced? So, the land revenue system led to the commercialization of agriculture. Earlier, much of the time it was for subsistence, so the economy kind of they fulfilled the requirement of a household, and not much of it went to the market. But when the British brought about the land revenue, then agriculture became commercialized. So, it was no longer for subsistence. Much of the product was taken to the market for sale, and now because the farmers were not directly going to the market, they were kind of middlemen in between, and so you had a kind of a class which emerged. So, what finally came to the peasant or to the agriculturalist was kind of a percentage in the total share, which was almost very negligible. So, it is kind of making sense that the transformation which was taking place in the village economy due to the British rule was in terms of eradication of the old system, and the traditional social fabric of India was kind of disrupted. The third area is Indian agrarian society as a peasant question. That is, he is trying to make sense of the present struggle that is going in different parts of the country. So, Desai writes in the work on agrarian society that whatever studies have been made of the rural life are spasmodic, one-sided, sectional and mostly cursory. And this is, he is making this comment because he makes sense of the whole idea that there was a kind of bias towards industrial urban society, and kind of neglect or kind of considering agrarian society as less significant. Much of the sociology which was coming in from the Western society, and because the industrialization and urbanization was taking place at a very high speed, most of the theories were based on this, and there was not very less kind of contribution to this. The reason this could be because that in these Western countries, this whole idea of peasantry kind of transformed because of industrialization. But in India, the peasants, that is the farmers and the agricultural labor, still constituted a significant number, and therefore kind of negating or ignoring agrarian society was kind of problematic. So, and the other reason why there was a kind of neglect of the rural sociology or agrarian sociology was that of the tradition modernity shift, that there was a understanding, again an evolutionary understanding, that tradition would be modernized and kind of get eradicated. So, the whole idea that development would actually eradicate agrarian rural structure was kind of considered as a symbolic of progress. this was something which was critical, that though there was a kind of industrialized socialist development where industries were being kind of focused, yet the agrarian structure was in place, and it was kind of this theory of the tradition and modernity at being two polar part kind of was rejected, and the whole idea of a continuum was suggested, that tradition and modernity can coexist, or rather coexist, in the Indian social structure. Therefore, if one wants to make sense of Indian reality, one has to understand what was tradition and as well as what is modern. So he kind of looks into the peasantry as dysfunctional, anomic, disintegrative, phenomenal. This is the way in which Western scholars would kind of theorize agrarian society, which was kind of put into the bottom margin, and all the focus was on development, capitalism, and the economic changes that was taking place. Desai rejected this transition from agrarian to urban and advocated the study of each in its own context. And it's kind of not denying the fact that agrarian does not always transform into modern. So agrarian social structure is kind of retains its structure even though modernization takes place. And so the peasant question has to be understood with the impact of spread of capitalism, emphasis on the production for profit, transformation of land from means of subsistence to commodity. So he is kind of considered as one of the earliest sociologists who provides a systematic study of rural society, taking into account the economy, the polity, the social reality, as well as the problems, and he was kind of trying to understand the main or the core problem of rural India, and he kind of traces it to the larger historical philosophical perspective or the transformation which was getting place. And then he's also saying that the peasantry is not a homogeneous. Maybe in the Western context, the peasantry can be identified as a homogeneous context, but in the India, there is kind of a cutting across. So you have kind of multiple identity which can go on, and they could be the peasantry, it could be heterogeneous. The last area of his contribution is state and society, and he is critical of the Indian state, and the work, his classical work is The Myth of the Welfare State. So here he is going to critique the whole notion of welfare state, and he says, or A.R. Desai is of opinion, that the idea of a welfare state is myth. Why? Because he does kind of studies the welfare state in other parts of the country, where also in the developed countries, and he does not find any country which would actually fulfill all the criteria of a welfare state. So, and even in the developed countries, the level of economic and social security to all citizens is not guaranteed. So, it basically gives 4 features of welfare state. A positive state, that is, a welfare state would be more in terms of not only maintaining law and order, but to ensure that the problems that individual or the mass, the citizens are facing is kind of eradicated. So, the state works for the welfare of the society. The second is a democratic state, and he says that democracy is essential conditions for the welfare state. And the third is a state with mixed economy, where both private capitalist and the public ownership are given equal weightage. And therefore, we see that he has given a comprehensive understanding of society in India, but he was critically criticized on a certain ground. First was his kind of criticism of using Marxism, that there were criticism that he kind of uses economic dimension to understand the society. His approach is not empirical, and according to K. Balgopal, he says that the classification that A.R. Desai gives is incomplete. He kind of only uses Marxism to understand the agriculture, which can be kind of problematic. So, the most important critique of Desai is that Desai was of opinion that the movement to socialist society would improve conditions, but there is no or guarantee and no evidence that socialism would lead to an egalitarian society. But apart from his critique, the contribution that he has done to kind of make sociology of India interdisciplinary and holistic is kind of makes him as one of the most prominent Marxist sociology in India. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.